Alright, what is going on, everybody? Back again today to bring you guys another review about a fantasy book. I don't do a lot of book reviews on this channel, but today we're getting one, and that is going to be, you can tell by the title, Wheel of Time Book 1, The Eye of the World. I was motivated to read this when I watched the opening first 3 episodes of the Amazon Prime show, and then about a week later, episode 4 came out. I watched that, and right after, like an hour after watching episode 4, I was like, that's it, I'm going to go read the books. So I went to Barnes& and Noble and got the first book. Since then, I have completed it. I finished it. I'm on to book 2. And yeah, so I'm going to do a separate review of season 1 of the show. And in that, I'm going to compare and contrast the two. This video is just going to be all about the book. So very early on reading this, it really kind of gave me a very nostalgic vibe. When I was 14, 15 years old, that was the time when me and my like couple closest friends in like middle school, junior high school, we were really into reading fantasy stuff. Harry Potter, Chronicles of Narnia, Inheritance Cycle, Artemis Fowl, a lot of young adult fantasy, but it's still fantasy. And I honestly don't know how this series slipped under our radar. Like none of us read it, and I don't know how, because it is right. It was reading this. It took me back. It felt like I was journeying back to those years of my life where I was super enamored with this kind of stuff. And yeah, since then I've talked to some of my buddies from back then, and I'm like, guys, I don't know how this slipped under our radar. I don't know how none of us read this series. It is a long series, and I'm not sure yet if I'm totally committed to reading all 14 books. But we'll see. We'll see how far I get. I'm on to book 2. I liked it. I'm liking it enough to continue it so far. And the reason for that is the nostalgia feeling it gives me. This book is very classic fantasy. Like, it's just a very old school, classic fantasy type story. So, if you're the kind of person who reads a lot of fantasy stuff, like that's pretty much all you read, and you try to get into this, you're probably going to find it a little mundane, a little boring, because this is 100% a very generic, very. I'm speaking about just book 1 here, not the whole Wheel of Time. Just book 1, The Eye of the World, is a very, very generic, very mundane, very just classic, typical fantasy story. You know, the characters from the small village get called upon to go on a quest because they're important for some reason, and they journey across the land and travel to all these cities and locations and see all this fantastical shit, and they get separated for a while, and then they meet back up, and then there's a climactic thing where they have to go to this dangerous area and do this dangerous thing, and they confront evil people there. And yeah, it's very, very old school, just a really old school, classic, mundane fantasy story. For me, that was refreshing because the past few years, if you watch my video of all my favorite fantasy book series, past several years, I've pretty much been devoted to sci-fi and superheroes and comic books. And I have not really dabbled in a lot of fantasy, like real high fantasy. The Witcher is about as far as I've gone in fantasy in the last like 5 years. So this was this was a very refreshing story for me to read. It was almost like a return to form. It was like getting back to my roots of what made me a nerd, and that was refreshing. That was fun. But like I said, for people out there who are just reading fantasy all the time, there's so much fantasy series, fantasy authors out there to read. This is going to seem very basic if you pick this up. At least this first one. I'm told, but based on all the research I've done online, I've come to the conclusion that like you got to get to book 2. In the second book is really where Robert Jordan, the author, that's really where he kind of like he hangs a very sharp turn and takes the series in its own direction. So I'm trying not to give away too many spoilers or anything here, but yeah, basic premise of the book, it introduces you to like, several main characters, 4 or 5 of them, and they're living in this village, and they're just simple village folk and whatnot. And then this mage wizard lady shows up with her like bodyguard, who's just this badass fighter and warrior. And shortly after they arrive, the village's like big festival night is interrupted by an attack by these beasts. These like, it's basically, Robert Jordan doesn't use orcs in this. Orcs being the typical bad guy race that they use in fantasy. He invented his own. They're called Trollocs, and they're basically like they're like almost like chimeras in a weird way, but not quite. Like they're bipedal, they walk on two legs, but some of them are like werewolf, like wolfman looking. They have like a wolf snout and like a wolf face and some ram horns, and some of them have beaks, and some of them have more like pig snouts and pig tusks, like boar tusks. They don't all look the same, but they're like these weird hybrid, half man, half beast, walking on two-leg evil creatures, and they're called Trollocs. Trollocs attack the village. They manage to fend them off, I guess, a little bit, but the village suffers damage, some people die, and then the next morning, the wizard lady and her bodyguard tell these other 4 or 5 characters, like, you guys are all super... Basically, this is the fucked up thing. She basically says, there's a thing in Wheel of Time where you're called ta'veren, and ta'veren basically means that, like, the fate of... The Wheel of Time, which is not a wheel like on a car, it's a wheel like a spinning jenny that like weaves yarn or string or threads. Yeah, it's the Wheel of Time has a plan for you. If you're ta'veren, it means that like you are important to the fate of the world. So in other words, she tells them you're all ta'veren, which means you're super important to the story. That's basically what that means. Is like, hey, you're ta'veren, you're important to the plot. So, yeah, I thought that was funny. And she's like, they're after you. The Trollocs and the evil things came here because they're after you, young kids. They're like 18, 19 years old. Like I think like the youngest one is maybe 17. But yeah, they're after you. They came here for you guys, so you all got to leave with us to save your village. And so then they do, and they go on this quest. And at first, it's like the wizard lady's like, I'm gonna take you to my headquarters where you'll be safe. But other shit happens, and they discover other shit going on. They got to go to other places, and yeah. And it's all because there's this plot of like, there's this evil entity known as the Dark One, whose real name is Shaitan, and it's basically Satan. It's this world, it's this fictional universe's version of Satan, and they're like, he's breaking free of his prison. Like he was imprisoned a long time ago, and he's starting to break free, and there are forces at play here that are trying to counteract him and fight against him and keep him from breaking free. But then there's also forces that are allied with him, and they want to help him break free and conquer the world in shadow and remake it in their dark image. And it's a very basic fantasy good versus evil story. And yeah, I found it pretty entertaining, but I'll say it again. As I was reading it, I definitely felt along the way like, okay, if it had not been like, if I had not just taken like a 5-year break from high fantasy, I would be thinking that this is some basic ass shit. But I did. I had taken a 5-year break from fantasy, so reading this was very refreshing. It was very return to form, getting back to my roots of what made me a nerd, and I really liked it. So anyone out there who's thinking about whether or not they should give this a shot, I say yes. However, in terms of giving the whole Wheel of Time a shot, if you're, like I said, if you're an avid fantasy reader, I hate saying this about book series, but it's like maybe just find a very detailed plot synopsis online in the form of like a YouTube video or like just like a blog or something. I don't know. Find a very detailed plot synopsis of this first book and read that, watch that, get that whole story, and then just jump into book 2. Because it is some basic ass shit. It's not breaking any boundaries or doing anything new. It's very basic. It's very old school, just classic fantasy adventure type shit. So, but he took this opportunity, Robert Jordan took this opportunity to do a lot of world building. They go to a lot of different locations in this one book, this very first book, and it kind of starts to, it's meant to be like, oh, they're in a new location now, let me go to the map that's in the front of the book and see where that is. And then you start to kind of form a picture in your mind without having to look at the map. You kind of start to just remember where things are in this world and where they take place and stuff like that. So it's a world building technique, I guess. I don't know. And then there's just a lot of specific like lingo and terminology in this book that are they're signature to this fantasy series, this fantasy universe, and it's stuff that you're really only going to learn. Like, it's words and names that you're really only going to learn the meaning of if you read the whole book. That being said, though, at the back of the book, he did put a glossary of all the different names and terms and stuff of his fantasy world. There is a glossary in there. But if you buy the book for the glossary, you might as well read the book. So, yeah, that's my take on Wheel of Time Book 1, The Eye of the World. I enjoyed it, but how much of my enjoyment was based on the fact that I had not read high fantasy in a while, and this is just a refreshing thing for me? I don't know. Like, I'm going to go ahead and give the book like an 8.5 out of 10. But I could really see and understand how, like, if you're an avid fantasy reader and just you're reading fantasy left and right all the time, I could see how you give this book like a 5.5 or like a 6. I totally get it. So yeah, that's my take on it. And I'll just go ahead and say this here in case, for the people who don't want to go watch my review of season 1 of the show, I did enjoy this book more than season 1 of the TV show. So there's that. Take that for what you will. If you've been watching the season 1 of the TV show and you're like, I like this, but something's missing, I don't know, try the book. I didn't like it like infinitely better. It's not like night and day. But if there was a gun to my head and I had to pick one, I had to either read the book or watch season 1, I'd pick the book. But that's just me. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Let me know what you guys think. Leave some comments down below. Get a discussion started. If you like this video, please hit the like button. That really helps out the channel. Maybe subscribe to the channel if you want to help out even more. Check out some of my other videos. And other than that, I will see you guys next time.